Welcome to WebT News. I'm your host Divya. The Myanmar military coup on 1st of February 2021 brought to a sudden halt the democratic process that had just begun. In fact, Myanmar's experiment with democracy lasted only 3 months. Myanmar for 50 years has been under direct and indirect military rule from 1962 to 2011 and has never been free of military intervention. The European Union suspended sanctions on Myanmar too quickly in 2012, and the Obama administration lifted sanctions in 2016, but above all did not put in any monitoring or other checks and balances to monitor and restrict the army's intervention. In addition, the UN Security Council veto system has been a stumbling block, the membership of which is in the hands of the same 5 countries always. Also, any one of these countries can unilaterally veto, that is, a majority is not needed. Taking advantage of this unilateral veto power, Russia and China vetoed the first strongly worded draft. To discuss the dangers posed by the coup to democratic and human rights in Myanmar, I am joined by one of the young and upcoming prominent leaders and activist, Ms. Jade Moore. Jade is in her final year of study at the University of Melbourne and has been leading the charge. I completed a brief interview with her in Canberra in February, where she is leading a protest in front of the Chinese embassy. She is also leading the Myanmar Students Association of Australia in Melbourne. She is a very courageous young woman, and as she is on student visa, which means she will be returning to Myanmar at the end of her visa, where she could face prosecution for protesting. Jade, welcome to the program. I want to begin by asking, describe the situation to the audience in Myanmar at the moment.
Hi, thanks for having me here today, Divya. It's a great pleasure to talk to you and share with you my insights about what's happening back home and my personal story as well.
Yes.
So currently things are going out of hand back home, and civilian body is going out in the streets, protesting, asking for what they so deserve, which is the right to express themselves freely. And they've been pushing forward to that, but they're faced by this martial law and brutal police crackdown and so many other forceful detainments, and there was no legal representation to those who were forcefully detained during the protests and after the protests. At times, they're home. Police forces come to their houses and take things away, grab people whenever they are suspected of involving in this protest. And simply, the main goal here is that most people are just doing it because they're just really expressing their frustration towards this military coup that happened. And they're not using any armed forces, but in the state news, there are propaganda circulating around that these protesters are the one enacting violence. So that would be my summary for that for now. Yep.
Okay. Describe the reaction of youth in Myanmar and outside Myanmar.
To take you through this storyline, my family is in Myanmar. I'm the only one living abroad. And I am currently in Australia.
Yeah.
I have this privilege to speak my mind. And back home, youth my age, merely for the speaking for what they want and what they truly deserve, they are being detained. They are brutally cracked down on the streets whenever they go out and protest. And like I said before, they're not using any violence means. And I think they're truly courageous, because on the other day, there was this girl who got shot by the sniper with the t-shirt say, "Everything will be okay." That shows how optimistic young people are in really battling against this whole military regime. That's what the youth holds. So the same goes for me. As one of the youth bodies from the globe, who are second generation Myanmar kids, we are so optimistic about the outcome that could be the end result of this. And we're really looking forward to that because, first of all, we don't want to repeat the same history. Like 50 years back, people have been put into this generation bracket where the education has been stage run and the quality of it, the method of the education system is just so wrong and it has made a big impact to these young and brilliant minds that who could have been flourishing and who could have been reaching their potential if they were given a chance. But after having tasted essence of democracy within these matters of a few years, young people are not hesitant to fight for their future and fight for what they truly deserve. And I think we will not stop fighting for it. As much as a lot of, student body, like in the 88 risings as well, like that's where the youth came up and they wanted to go for it. The same goes for this generation as well. As part of the youth body, we're not going to shy away from the fact that this is happening. We will acknowledge it, and we're really gonna have to keep fighting for it, and through non-violent means, of course. And plus, with the technology available on this day, it's much more easier to let the world know what's happening back home through digital documents, video files, through other channels of means. So that's one thing that I like to point out is a major advantage to current generation in comparison to the 88 generations or the student revolutions in the past.
That's good for them. What was it like growing up during the military dictatorship?
It was really funny as I was 5-year-old when it was 2005. So that was the time that I was supposed to be enrolled in first grade. And there was this government school that I was put into because my family didn't know any better. My family was, also growing up from that generation. And I remember vividly, starting from the grade 1 until grade 5, I was memorizing everything from the textbooks, whatever that may be, 8 subjects or 7 subjects, everything words by words. And there was no internet available, SIM cards, they're overpriced to 5,000 AUD just to purchase one single card of SIM card, and only a handful can purchase it. So as you can see, there's this telecommunication system sort of given to the privileged body where they can afford to tap into this information, they can afford to keep the call or communicate, contact. So growing up, that's one of the things that I remember the most. Plus the curfews in terms of, that's in the deserted areas, but most of the times television channels, we hear all these things saying BBC, VOA, RFA, they're bringing in voices of insurgents, it's not trustworthy. And growing up, hearing all these things over and over and over, you think that's the truth, because truth hasn't ever been in the light of it. So when I was growing up, I thought people who are abroad, so like Dr. Damon, they could be potential betrayer of the country. So that's how people portrayed it back then. It's like, oh yeah, they're just seeking international help because they don't love the country enough. So there was this major nationalist ideals embedded in since really, really young, through the media as well as in education.
That's interesting. How will the military coup affect Myanmar's youth? Will we see another lost generation?
So that's the last thing that we're hoping for. So we, after having tasted and having this privilege to really see and tap into this global realm, we don't want to step backwards.
Yeah.
We don't want it anymore. We don't want it for anybody. And we don't want the same thing happening to the next generation, babies and other generations to come. Really, like we want to set this straight and stop this vicious circle from repeating.
Yeah.
And it's not the first time. Like there were 3 times, like 1962, 1988. Now it is happening again. So at this point, what we're privileged. The one advantage is that we have technology, like the times before, and right now the telecommunication system has been really strong. So means of exchanging information as well as sharing what's really happening in major cities, the atrocities taking place. Now the world can see it, and like the past times. So thanks to the internet, thanks to the technology available, hopefully this generation can battle through this and really bring back the democracy that they so deserve.
Yes, I hope so. Military already had control. Why does the military want absolute control?
When you ask this question, it's really funny to me because as part of young generations, it's a totally absurd idea.
Yeah.
To take an absolute control, encouraging this process of taking an absolute control, right? But those military generals, the terrorist generals, they're not educated enough to make educated choices.
Yeah.
And they don't know about economy. They don't know about international relations. They don't know about taking care of the country to the grassroots. They don't know about what the youth holds. They don't know about what this land holds with the potential it has. All they know about is what can be brought to the families in terms of wealth and how they will be treated within the handful, within that bureaucracy and hierarchy. So to address that, I think it's just merely on the hands of these military generals who are not in touch with the reality and the world out there.
Yes.
And they're not aware of things happening around the world. And the only thing that they can think of right now is a handful of these people that they can control. And yes, the land that they so are proud of, but are selling out to China. So that's the hypocrisy that lines. Because in this case, I will ask, is that the greed that's fueling them, or is that the stupidity that's fueling their actions?
Yes. Myanmar has joined the Milk Tea Alliance, which is an online solidarity movement between Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Thailand. How will this alliance help in restoring democracy?
So recently on the social media platform, I saw this Milk Tea Alliance as well. And I was pinged by this idea that, like young people are starting to fight for this conquest against this absolute control, or in certain way to form directly or indirectly. So to Thailand, it has been thriving, not thriving, but it has been functioning under military, semi-military government as well. But for Hong Kong and other countries, they're kind of seeking to separate this entity, like this control of power by China. Yeah. So I can see where Myanmar people find themselves in, because first of all, they're speaking against the military dictatorship, plus they are trying to call out China's doing in their internal affairs. Yeah. So it's great that they have started talking about this as young activists to really express their frustrations towards this form of government that they do not want. Yes, but one thing to highlight is that the democracy in terms of normative terms that we're looking for, is that the institutional democracy that we're looking for to change? Because if we look at Myanmar, it's not the normative. We're not falling into this democratic norms. We operate in a really special way, but the constitution itself is flawed.
Yeah.
So, like in the previous interview, there's this 2008 constitution, which is just not democratic at all. But right now, with the Spring Revolution in Myanmar, what's happening right now, we're really addressing both things. Like, what do we see democracy as? Or do we start with fundamental changes in the constitution? Or do we start on the streets, on the activist level? So we have to meet somewhere in the middle to tackle that issue in terms of seeking and voicing for democracy. Because democracy itself, repeating the name itself, like, it's easy, like, but the direction Myanmar people follow has to be uniquely Myanmar way.
Yeah.
But young activists in the streets, their norms have to meet and restructure this, and sort of like their norms sort of have to be integrated into this constitutional framework so that they meet somewhere in the middle and operate in a more realistic way, because norms itself won't change the country. Norms itself won't build the country. It's the constitution and frameworks, legal frameworks that take place, that are taking place, that's going to be taking place, that will govern all these people. And people are supposedly the core of democracy. So there has to be a structure in place to govern these norms.
Yes, you're right. What are the solutions for separating the role of the army from governing civilians?
So this is really important, like we said before, because Burma has been subjected to 50 years and on of this military control indirectly over so many decades. People think it's normal to have this demado, the army, as part of their defense mechanisms. So if we know about U.S. politics, there are three layers, right? Yeah. So it's executive, legislative, and the judiciary. Yeah. So in Myanmar, what's happening is, for executive power, usually the president has most of the executive power. So he or she can say, okay, we're gonna declare war on that or this, and also like maneuvering troops. That's where the voice of president lies. Yeah. But uniquely in Myanmar case, Myanmar line, the one that you know, this military leader is given by the Constitution, 2008 Constitution, an outright power to declare war wherever they want to. So that's the case that I really want to highlight, because back in 2011, around there's this humanitarian case happening in the Rohingya crisis. That wasn't part of State Councilor Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's voice that's governing this military actions. It was purely Myanmar's. But the fact that the executive power mostly lies in Myanmar give him lots and lots of power. So apart from this Rohingya crisis right now happening in 2021, he is doing what he says and what he thinks is right on his own words. Yeah. And so that's really, really something that we should keep in mind.
Yes. Is Myanmar army acting by themselves, or are there foreign interests?
So to answer that question, Myanmar army has an interest in their own sort of personal ties with their economic gains and their wealth accumulation. So they've been selling out resources, to name it a few: gas, jade, oil, gold, whatever you name it, timber. So it's one thing in Burma. And a lot of things that foreigners, especially China, has a keen interest in. Yeah. So there's certainly a connection between China and Myanmar military heads, where they might be engaging in G2G, which is a summarization of government-to-government communication level. So China's known to be furthering their economic interests as well as business interests.
Yes.
And there are so many cases, not cases, but there are so many infrastructures taking place already in Myanmar, like especially with Nyesong Simangeng, which is happening in Kachin state, where the big dam is built around that area and in a major river. So that river is the lifeblood of Myanmar people, because it goes all the way to Adam and Sea, all the way down.
Yeah.
So it's really important in agricultural business of Myanmar people, but China's taken a keen interest in that. And there were rumors that military government has already signed with China as a government-to-government relations that, okay, this investment is going to happen. So it was halted for a while because people were really unhappy about it. And during NLD administration, it was put off. So that's one thing. Second thing is there's this Jiaopu, which is happening in Arkan, Rakhine state, where this major gas pipelines are channeled all the way to the Bengal Sea. So that's where they take keen interest in as well. So that's second. Third, the Silk Road.
Yeah.
So there were plans about infrastructure taking place in Myanmar from the mainland China. So essentially, what's happening in Myanmar is that it's like another issue, another conflict. The same thing happened in South China Sea, but it's happening in the west part of the sea. So there's something that really should be considering. Plus, the fact that China has vetoed in the UN Security Council meeting, yes, along with Russia, showcases that though they might not be officially voicing their the involvement with the internal conflicts and internal affairs, I question their audacity to say we don't want to intervene their internal affairs when they've already established business ties with the military, and that's the hypocrisy at its finest form. Second thing is that, so right now we can question, like, can we really kick China out of this Security Council system because they've been vetoing all these things and they're not respecting any human rights? So we can ask that question. So that question comes down to the General Assembly. That can be overturned if China to be kicked out of the Security Council. That can be overturned by the General Assembly's majority vote, which is 2/3 majority vote. And if they raise that to a question, China can't stay in this Security Council for long. So that's something, that's to be considered in the long term. But yes, internal affairs, external affairs, it's complex. Yes, we gotta acknowledge it. But for now, there's no denying that China's involved in this coup, though it's not explicitly said.
Yes. What were the reasons for China blocking United Nations Security Council's first draft resolution?
I think I briefly mentioned about that in a case where China's keen interest in economic relations with current military heads, as well as the ongoing projects happening. And it's really important to note that if we use just statewide economic sanctions from the international community, yes, like Dr. Taiwan said before, most people are gonna go back to China or Russia to seek help. And by people, I mean the military generals. And they're living in this lavish lifestyle with their private jets, and people are suffering on the streets. Like their daily wage is like $2 or $3, and it's insane. It is insane. And not to mention the income inequality, the living standards, education that they receive as the first-class citizens, plus the normal citizens who are just put to the statewide government-led schools where they're taught to learn everything by heart, learning propaganda, things. So people don't even start to question because they don't think like it's even a right thing to do. They don't know what's right. They don't know what they should stand up for. But right now, people are learning so much. People are connecting with internet and a lot of other telecommunication systems. So government find it hard to shut that off. And there was one case upon the day of the coup. There was this Chinese flights coming in to Myanmar, whereas, let me emphasize, they rejected this flight coming from India to give away this COVID vaccine. And they were like, no, we're not taking that in anymore. But we questioned this China's involvement because there were 5 flights coming in on the same day. Yeah. They reject India's flight, and they were just purely vaccines were in there. Like there was nothing in it. Like there was nothing underlying. So it's something that we should question, but at the same time, because I don't live in there, I can't say anything in particular because I don't live there. But there were cases of China really digging into Myanmar's government and administration system in terms of economic gains.
That's awful. If other countries' economic and political pressure on Myanmar's military, how will that help?
So one thing that I really want to highlight on in terms of economic and political pressure, because in ASEAN countries, Singapore's rule or Singapore's power in economic power is significant, highly significant. But only recently, Singapore government has been vocal and been calling out about this military wrongdoings. Because there were cases of military leaders and their associates dumping their money in Singapore banking system. And Singapore should own to their words and take responsibility in tackling that as well. Because a lot of military generals and their family members study or like invest in Singapore as well. So in terms of that, like Singapore can't be neutral in where they side with or who they side with, because clearly just attracting financial investment in the name of it while ignoring all these humanitarian crises that the government, military generals and this previous governments put through, it's not humane. It's not what a country should stand for. So that's something that we should address in ASEAN relations, apart from the international community. But in terms of international community, there's this targeted sanctions are the only solution before the R2P intervention. R2P interventions, yes, may be necessary, but the risk to the civilians as well as to the place, it's huge, because we've learned that in cases of Vietnam or cases of North Korea, South Korea, in Korean Peninsula in the 1956. So those are the things that we really should be wary about, because with that R2P comes peacemaking and peacekeeping. So there are two forces. So after, let's say, before we get to that, the country has to accept the R2P force. And right now, there's no one accepting R2P force apart from the CRPH, which is the interim government. So they are accepting that, but there is no, there's an integral part. International community has to, and absolutely has to recognize CRPH as the only governing body. And only that way, two major links can come together. Okay, we need R2P. And yes, we have to start selecting peacekeeping forces as well. And that is left to the UN in terms of maneuvering peacekeeping troops. And in case, second thing, in case when that happens and major cities get damaged, things like that, then peacemaking force has to come. Yeah. They have to reestablish this education system as well as this infrastructure things. So it has to be considered in the long term. And it is, for now, from my personal point of view, peacekeeping forces may be necessary in a few days to come, and international community can't ignore that, and they really have to draft a solution rather than just this targeted sanction, because the atrocities are getting worse and worse back home.
Yeah, hopefully they'll address it.
Yes.
What the future hold for activists like you who are on student visa? What actions could protesters returning to Myanmar face, and do you feel it is personally worth the risk?
It's really funny because I am currently privileged to be here, sleeping soundly because I don't hear sound grenades or shotguns. Every night, people back home, their internet cut-offs, their electricity cut-offs when the military felt like it. And I'm in such a privileged position to really be able to have this spotlight and speak about these issues. But back home, a lot of students don't have this privilege, but they're faced with these bullets pierced through their hearts or the heads, through the skulls. And it's just truly appalling. I don't think about myself at this point or what I'll be putting myself into, because a lot of people in the streets back home are putting their lives in danger. And right now, I don't think I am in a place to be worrying about my danger. If that happens, I'll have to find a solution by then. But I'm not gonna stay silent and remain silent, because it's always worth the risk to speak about these matters when you can and when you have the chance to.
Any closing remarks?
So on that term, I am truly privileged to talk to Divya today about my insights as well as my story growing up in Myanmar, and just something that I learned from my own free time, as well as things that I have been finding really horrendous in terms of what's happening back home. One thing to keep in mind and bear in mind is that it is a crime against humanity. It's not just an internal affair alone at this point.
Yes.
And people cannot stay silent. And it's really important because people might question, who are you siding with?
Yes, yes.
Are you loyal and are you devoted to preserving your name in a nationalist way? Yeah. Or are you casting a light in truth and what's happening back home? Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Then you really have to say, what your conscience leads is the way to go.
Yes.
Because we can't be staying silent for those who are tortured to death through investigations, or we can't be silent to those issues where police use brutal forces and crackdowns and using live ammunitions to those protesters out there who are risking their lives. And we cannot also stay silent for those who are detained for no apparent reasons at all. So it's beyond different categories of human rights violation that they are I'm not going to say the military government, the terrorist military group is enacting. So it's a shame it's happening in 21st century and in 2021, right in the middle of COVID-19 crisis. So on that note, I don't want anyone to feel hopeless back home, though we may be helpless in this time, in this tough circumstances. When this set of tough circumstances are imposed to us, but it's important to not lose hope, but keep battling for what you know is right, and what you know is the essence of humanity.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. That would be my closing remark.
That's it from me today. We'll see you next week with another current affairs program. Thank you.